Before I found Christ, I was in a pretty dark spot. It got bad. I went through bouts of depression, drug use, getting into fights. I'd go to bars sober, looking for somebody to beat up, and then after I got drunk, I'd go find that person. I was in my apartment one night, heavily intoxicated, and I decided I was going to take my life that night. I actually pulled the trigger, and a round didn't fire. If that wasn't a God moment, I don't know what is.
Well, welcome guys. Thanks so much for being here. As always, we're going to be sharing our stories tonight. We've been unpacking what that looks like, who you were before Christ, how you met Christ, and who you are now. So who wants to start?
I'll tell my story.
Okay.
I was born and raised actually in Christian home. My dad is
the
actually...
best way that people come to know Jesus is through other Christians. And so if we can set up communities of intentional Christians, more and more people will come to know him just as a result of that. We do something called story groups, where we gather small groups of people in our church and coach them and train them on how to tell their story with Jesus.
All right. Before I found Christ, I was in a pretty dark spot. I started kind of seeing coincidences that weren't coincidences, you know. God brought me my wife and her daughter. She came from a very Christian background. She wanted me to support praying. She says, you know, I know you are not a religious person, anything to do with religion, you don't even want to hear it, but this is what we do. This is how I raised my daughter, and if you're going to be involved in our family, you're going to need to be involved in this.
So Greg and I met at community potlucks that we had started in Red Rock. Found pretty quick that he was in a band and he played bass, and so I'm a guitar player, and it was an easy thing to put together. Eventually, we started playing music together, and I said, why don't you come over and let's practice some worship songs. And so we're playing music together that day, and it just kind of led to stories being shared. You know, I started sharing my story a bit of who I've been, what my background's been, and kind of pushed on his story a bit, and I just started asking him questions.
I was a little apprehensive, but this conversation with Cody took place just before my son was born. I remember sitting out in the hallway. I'm all gowned up. Megan, she's in the operating room. The anesthesiologist couldn't get the epidural in. And he came out and told me that they're gonna try a couple more times, and if it doesn't work, they're gonna sedate my wife. And I just remembered saying out loud, I'm like, God, if you're who you say you are, if you are who people around me say you are, you need to show me now. And the surgeon came out right after that, and he says, you need to come in now. We're delivering your son. I was just looking at this creation, and right there I knew that this is God's work.
And so I just kind of said, what's there to lose, Greg, at this point? What is there to lose in making a decision right now and saying this prayer?
We did a salvation prayer in his office. It started connecting all the dots of my past and times where God had intervened. God's here, and he's working. You know, he's working within the community. Look how far I've come. I'm excited to see where God continues to take me.
At this point, we're a little over 2 years old, and we've had over 130 people say yes to Jesus for the first time.
We've seen people empowered to share their faith, and as a result, we've seen new believers multiply. I think when you own your own story, you begin to own the fact that God has placed specific people and communities in your sphere of influence to share that story. As a result, churches will be planted in those places.
So now, Village Church is getting to see its story replicated in another location. So we're storytellers personally, but now as a church as well, and that's a really awesome thing to see.
Go ahead and get started with our group tonight, and let's first start off by telling our stories.